I'm Amy Kaminski, and I'll get us started, and then I'm going to be turning to Max and then Jen to keep us going. Next slide, please. Okay, so throughout the symposium, we've heard a lot of valuable perspectives to help us come to terms with what commercial space is as a concept and as an element of space activity. And we've seen a lot of examples offered so far about what it means to be commercial and what it means to commercialize space, as well as the challenges and limitations associated with doing so. Jen, Max, and I are here to lend further insight into what commercial space is, albeit from yet a different angle. We are not going to question what it means to be a commercial activity or entity. We accept as our premise that commercial refers to companies who seek to make a profit, regardless of whether or not they've actually done so, and regardless of whether their target clients are government or other commercial entities or both. Instead, we want to explore the space part of the term commercial space and expand consideration of what is meant by a space company. Next slide, please. So I think we all know certain types of companies that are definitively space companies, and these include the established and emerging companies that are focused on activities like launch and satellite development or operations and space tourism. But at NASA, where Max, Jen, and I all work, our engagement of the private sector goes beyond companies that make space their sole or primary focus. We also work with companies who have gotten into the space game because they bring expertise from related fields. Adjacent expertise is what we often call it, that can contribute to NASA's mission. And an early example of this was when the women's undergarment manufacturer Playtex won contracts in the 1960s to create the spacesuits that the Apollo astronauts wore on the Apollo 11 mission on the moon. NASA has also formed partnerships with companies like IMAX, whose 70 millimeter film cameras were operated by shuttle astronauts on orbit to give the public an unprecedented glimpse into life in space. Today, NASA makes funding awards and establishes partnerships for technology development, outreach, and other purposes with companies in a variety of industries, recognizing that they can bring value to space activity. Our intent in this presentation is to shed light on the kinds of companies NASA is engaging and the mechanisms by which we are engaging them to solve various space-related technological problems. What we aim to highlight is that thinking only about the companies that are obviously space companies doesn't fully capture the private sector role in space. And that raises some important questions about the terminology we use. Namely, what defines a space company? And is it a term driven by a company's intents or how it self-identifies? Or is it about how customers and analysts perceive that company's activities? We ask this because many of the companies that we work with at NASA wouldn't necessarily identify themselves as space companies. And relatedly, can the term commercial space, which is the subject of this symposium, account adequately for all private sector activity related to space? So now I'm going to turn to Max, who will share some examples of how NASA is reaching small and large businesses, as well as entrepreneurs, through mechanisms like grants and contracts, prize competitions, and other kinds of partnerships. Most of the examples come from programs and investments managed by NASA's Space Technology Mission Directorate, which is where we all work. But some of them stem from other NASA organizations as well. And as Max will show, although these companies' sole primary or initial focus isn't space, they are nonetheless playing an important role in advancing space activity. Over to you, Max.
Thanks, Amy. Can we go to the next chart? Thank you. To highlight some more recent examples, let's take a look at something that most people are familiar with, the Perseverance rover. It's currently exploring the surface of Mars, and a project of that size requires a lot of contributions from a lot of team members, many of whom would absolutely consider themselves space companies. And if we look specifically at the contributions to Perseverance from companies that matured technologies through the SBIR program, which focuses on developing and infusing technologies from small businesses, we indeed see that several of those companies consider their primary markets to be NASA, government, or private space. However, we also see a number of companies that would not. Next slide, please. For example, Air Squared, who developed the scroll compressor for the MOXIE unit, developed compressor technologies for medical, fuel cell, and automotive applications. ATI Industrial Automation's primary markets are robotic manufacturing facilities right here on Earth, but were able to qualify one of their load cells for use in sample collection on the surface of Mars. And finally, Photon Systems, Inc. was able to adapt a deep UV laser originally intended for use in terrestrial wastewater testing and pharmaceuticals to NASA's needs, looking for signs of ancient life on Mars. Next slide, please. NASA also engages non-traditional space companies through programs like Prizes and Challenges, which aim to attract diverse sets of thinkers attacking problems from multiple angles. One of these challenges focused on 3D printing of lunar and Martian habitats. This challenge brought together a number of players that wouldn't be considered space companies, including large companies like Caterpillar and Bechtel in a partnership role, providing subject matter expertise, equipment, and facilities, as well as competitors, including small companies like ICON, which is focused on 3D printing houses here on Earth. None of these companies frequently did business with NASA, but as a result of this effort, ICON is currently under contract with NASA to develop additive construction techniques for building structures on the moon. Next slide, please. NASA also seeks solutions from the entrepreneurial community through programs like Science Mission Directorate's Entrepreneurs Call and NASA iTech. Many of these companies are specifically targeting large total addressable markets here on Earth, but find that NASA may have need for their technologies as well. For example, Mobile Ion is a company that is focused on mass spectroscopy solutions for disease detection and diagnosis in medical applications, but found that their technology could enhance the Science Mission Directorate's ability to collect samples for planetary life detection. And as NASA's manned missions become longer in duration and farther from home, the solutions that we seek also need to evolve. In addition to figuring out how to get to our destinations and back safely and do high-quality science, we must now consider how to live healthy, productive lives efficiently and sustainably for long periods. Programs like iTech look to leverage the efforts of startup companies focused on improving life here on Earth to benefit NASA and the space economy more broadly. We will certainly need to continue to engage traditional space companies to solve problems like how to get there and how to talk to ground control. But we will also have to keep our habitats clean. And for that, we may need companies like Daimler, who currently uses UV light to disinfect commercial airplane cabins. We will need to monitor our astronauts' mental health in the isolation of space. And for that, we may need to talk to companies like NeuroFlow, who develop remote health monitoring systems to identify and intervene in mental health issues. We may need to engage companies like Mojo Vision or Amalgamated Vision to provide augmented reality solutions to allow astronauts to maximize productivity and adapt to new situations. And we may need predictive maintenance solutions from companies like NanoPrecise to make sure that problems are identified before they become emergencies. None of these companies would consider NASA their primary customer, but each of them is working on a problem that NASA may very well need to solve as we extend human presence farther away from Earth. Next slide, please. Although the examples to this point have focused on companies and their technology, it is also important to note that non-traditional space investors are also playing a role in advancing space-related technology. This chart shows information segmented by investor type and fiscal year in NASA's NASA SBIR program's post-phase 2 funding vehicles. These are co-investment vehicles that allow the SBIR program to match contributions from investors dollar for dollar. Investors in this context can be NASA programs, other government agencies, and prime contractors, but they can also be investors that are not focused on space, but rather on terrestrial technology applications, who would not traditionally be thought of as space investors. For example, the industry and commercial category includes a leading home appliance company and a motorcycle production company, which are not traditionally considered commercial space companies. These investments are not only spinning out NASA technology to advance the state-of-the-art in private sector applications, these investments are also helping NASA to develop technology without us bearing the full burden of the tech development effort. We see in the data that in 2017, NASA invested approximately $3.5 million in both Phase 2E and CCRPP awards, which accounted for 33% of the total investment that year. But that year, industry and commercial investors also invested 2.7 of their own, accounting for 25% of the amount invested that year. Next slide, please. In 2019 and 2020, VC and angel investors, mostly interested in targeting large total addressable markets here on Earth, invested $2.6 and $1.4 million, accounting for 15% and 10% of the investment dollars contributed those years. Perhaps unexpectedly, these investors have invested more in these programs in recent years than space prime contractors. These non-traditional space investors are making real contributions to the advancement of NASA-relevant space technology. Hopefully, these examples demonstrate that contributions to the space economy are not coming solely from private companies providing services to government agencies or companies focused directly on expanding our capabilities in low Earth orbit. There are substantial contributions being made from companies and investors that are primarily focused on improving life right here on Earth. And now I'd like to turn it over to Jen for some final thoughts.
Thanks, Max, very much. Wrap it up for us. I'm Jen Gustetic, one of 3 program directors in NASA Space Technology Mission Directorate. I'll ask you to go to the next slide if you can. I'll share a bit more on the pathways within space tech that offer on-ramps and partnership opportunities for these commercial companies. Space tech engages and inspires thousands of entrepreneurs, researchers, and innovators, creating a community of America's best and brightest working on the nation's toughest challenges. Our current technology portfolio spans a range of discipline areas and technology readiness levels. Amy and Max lead 2 of the programs in early stage innovations and partnerships portfolio, as she mentioned, both the iTech program and the prizes, challenges, and crowdsourcing programs. As Max illustrated with his examples, there are a number of ways for non-space companies to work with STMD programs to advance commercial space objectives. There is private activity in space today, and certainly examples from the past that might not be what we often talk about as being quote-unquote commercial space. It's our objective to ensure these actors' contributions to commercial space aren't lost in the narrative about the emergence of commercial space. For example, space tech offers a number of ways for non-space companies to contribute to commercial space. iTech, a forum for startups to pitch their capabilities to NASA technologists and investors, attracts non-space companies by casting a wide net through broad topic areas, engaging investors that aren't exclusively focused on space, and reaching out through events and forums that target the entrepreneurial community beyond space. Prizes, Challenges, and Crowdsourcing, another program, attracts non-space companies by offering broad problem statements to invite a wide variety of innovators, and also by seeking partners to help administer the prizes and provide subject matter expertise. And finally, SBIR attracts non-space companies through co-investment opportunities at later stages of technology development, and also by providing an attractive source of non-dilutive R&D funding to small businesses that might see space applications for their capabilities and to de-risk their technologies. It's important to note that STMD is not the only mission directorate at NASA using these methods. The SMD, or the Science Mission Directorate's Entrepreneurs Call, was a prize competition led by the Science Mission Directorate, but it was done in close collaboration with STMD due to our role in SBIR and prizes. These methods, SBIR, prizes, and partnerships, are available to and leveraged by much of NASA. However, STMD is the steward for many of these approaches and on-ramps for the agency. As such, there are a number of pathways that STMD offers to invite non-space companies to contribute to commercial space as well as NASA objectives. Our colleague LK will speak later this session about some other ways that NASA STMD advances these technologies and commercial space companies through flight opportunities and public-private partnerships such as the Tipping Point and ACO solicitations. Next slide, and this is our last one. We want to emphasize that partnerships with companies not focused solely, primarily, or initially on space are making a difference in advancing space R&D and need to be accounted for in the assessment of the private sector role in space. This includes, among the many examples that Max shared, the small business, Applied Particle Technology, who won the NASA Air and Space Prize to develop small, accurate aerosol detectors for use on space station and for Earth applications. This is the image that you see before you on the slide. Non-space companies can act as investors, technology developers, technology and service providers, and partners in advancing outcomes of mutual interest. As with any partnership or private venture, there is risk involved in these activities, but broadening the pool of innovators and sectors we work with only strengthens the ecosystem around space. This perspective raises other questions for future and study and consideration that you can see in front of you. But in closing, we propose that the term commercial space and even space company seems somewhat restrictive in capturing the full set of private actors involved in commercial space activity when some companies may not identify with it yet. We suggest that private sector activity related to space is a more encompassing term. In discussions about the emergence of commercial space, we think it's important to not undersell the past, current, and potential future role that non-space companies could play in advancing emerging space markets. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present today.